Hey guys, thanks for listening in on this. A couple things. We're now past October 15th. The phones are starting to light up. If you're interested now in helping save taxpayers and add a lot of money to your bottom line, all right, now's the time to consider joining Tax Rep Network, okay? Again, use the discount code Tax Rep Now, all caps, one word. Tax Rep Now. You'll save $100 a month for 3 months. All right, guys, we're approaching very quickly the New England IRS Representation Conference. And there are a couple things I wanted to tell you that most of you may not know. Due to the fact of the coronavirus, businesses are suffering, marriages are failing. You can see the statistics, you know that. What most people don't realize is the people that are hurting are going to go seeking help. Not everyone can come and hire people like us. They're going to go to the low-income taxpayer clinics. The low-income taxpayer clinics are going to get swamped with taxpayers in desperate need of help to try to resolve their tax problems. The conference that we run November 19th and 20th, the New England IRS Representation Conference. First of all, it's 16 hours of hearing from the very top people, both private practitioners and all of the top government people, including Commissioner Chuck Rettig, Commissioner of Small Business Self-Employed Division, Eric Hilton, the Chief of Appeals, Andy Kiso, the Chief of IRS Criminal Investigation, James Lee, Lee Martin, the head of the Whistleblower Office is going to be joining us, and a lot of other folks from the government, all right? Michael Desmond, our IRS Chief Counsel, will be joining us on the program. So you're going to hear from the top people and the top practitioners. It's 16 credits, 2 days, Thursday, November 19th, Friday, November 20th. All of the proceeds go to charity. The Green and Sklar's Foundation, which backs the conference, donates money to the low-income taxpayer clinics at University of Connecticut School of Law, at Quinnipiac Law School, as well as other New Haven-based charities, okay? So this is an opportunity to get credits, really bone up on what is going on with the IRS, from whistleblowers to IRS collection to the CARES Act and COVID-19 fallout and enforcement, the new tax fraud office, everything that the IRS has going on, we will be covering. And again, 16 credits, it's $199. The vast majority of that money, after the costs are covered, and they're not that much because we're virtual this year, the vast majority of that money is going to go to help low-income taxpayers. So this is an opportunity for you to enjoy a great conference from your office, your home, your on your cell phone, wherever, get credits, but also help a lot of low-income taxpayers at the same time. All right? So I put the link in the description below. Please go check out the conference. We hope to see you there this year virtually, and hopefully we'll see you there next year at Mohegan Sun after the coronavirus is dealt with. All right? Enjoy the podcast. Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for Tax Rep Network. I'm obviously Eric Green. Joining me is Mike Villa. You probably have heard Mike and seen Mike speak. He's always at the New England Rep Conference, assuming he's not on trial trying a criminal tax case. Mike is a partner with Meadows Collier, Reed, Cousins, Crouch, and Ungerman in Dallas, Texas. You can read, I'll put a link to Mike's bio. So Mike does white collar criminal defense, obviously criminal tax defense. And I actually met you, Mike, when at the ABA, I walked into a talk that you were giving on Bank Secrecy Act. That was it.
Remember that.
Yeah, and I'm like, yeah, I don't defend banks, so it wasn't something that was of interest. And but I grabbed my coffee and I wander in the back, and you're up there talking, and you were talking about, it's not just banks, it's certain types of businesses, car dealers, which we do deal with, jewelers and dealers in precious, we deal with those. And all of a sudden I got like sucked into this conversation. I was like, holy cow, that is going to be big. And so afterward, you're walking out, and I'm like, carjacking you on the way out. And I'm like, dude, I got to talk to you about this because, I think that what you're talking about is spot on. And I think within a month, one of our car dealers got one of these BSA audits. And so anyway, that's how you and I actually ended up sort of becoming buddies. I basically latched onto Mike. And what I wanted to talk about today, and so first of all, Mike, thanks for doing this and taking the time to do it. So if you're listening, you probably have already seen, we're doing a panel on whistleblowing at the New England IRS Rep Conference this year. And we have Lee Martin, who's the director of the Whistleblower Office, which is big. Walter Pagano, one of the, I think, best known forensic accountants in the country, is joining us. And I'm moderating, and Mike has joined the panel. And so what you'll hear is sort of both, is a lot of the government's view of how the whistleblower process works and what you should be thinking about. And also sort of, statistics about the awards and that stuff. But in listening to it, Mike, we're listening to Lee, and who's a great guy. And Lee is saying, look, don't take it to CI, just give it to us. Don't worry about it. And we're going to look at the best award we can get, whatever. And my thought was, that's not really been my experience with this. And what I wanted to do is sort of talk about that without the government on the podcast, where so you and I can say, look, and I'm not, this, by the way, I'm not attacking Lee, who everything he said is absolutely true, but I think he glossed over or didn't.
Well, he has the government perspective, right? And
exactly.
He's got the government perspective, which they believe to be true and correct. And I think that belief is in good faith, but they're reporting to the public from a government perspective, who have never had clients waiting 7 years to hear back from a whistleblower program issue, right? We have clients who keep asking, why is this taking 3, 5, 7 years? What's really going on behind the scenes? The government whistleblower program will tell us truthfully that they are working on it. We're doing what we're supposed to do. And that's true. But from a practitioner perspective, who has a real life client, okay, in the real world, yep, they want to know what's really going on behind the curtain. Is there a way for me to expedite getting this whistleblower case to move forward? And I think that's where you might have a differing of opinion on if you're a practitioner trying to move the case forward, what are some things you might be able to do versus someone who works for the whistleblower program. They're going to say, follow all of these rules exactly and don't do anything different because that's the way we say to do it. Well, they work for the government. We don't, right? Yep. And that's the difference.
No, in fact, when I first spoke to Lee, I said, Lee, don't take offense, but my theory on this, or what I imagine, all right, and we might as well just get into it. So the whistleblower, you have whistleblower information. The way a whistleblower claim is brought officially is you file a Form 211, which you can get on the IRS website. Fairly simple form to fill in, but they do ask for information you may not have. But you fill in the 211 and you submit it. And I said, it's kind of what I'm picturing, Lee, is like the end of the Raiders of the Lost Ark, where they're wheeling the thing off into a warehouse and it's just going to get buried in there, right? It goes off, I think, to Utah, Ogden, I think is where they go, never to be heard from again, right? And of course, Lee said that that's not what happens. They're getting about 1,000 of these things a month. I think it's about, on average, about 12,000 a year, so about 1,000 a month. And they're weeding through them. They have their own, and this is what bothered me, they have their own technical experts that try to, make a decision what they think about the case. And then they will forward it to the proper unit. If it's IRS exam, if it's going to criminal, collections, whatever. What bothered me, and here's been my, Mike, I like your take on this. Here's been my experience. So a couple of years ago, like we brought a very big whistleblower case. I know it's still active. It's being worked. And I think I've got 4 or 5 right now pending before the government that are active, that are being worked by the government. So first of all, I love whistleblower cases. I'm pretty sure you do too.
Well, there's the opportunity to possibly have a nice recovery for possibly a smaller amount of work. So that makes it the idea sounds pretty good if you can make it happen.
Well, and you left out the justice part, and we're getting even with the bad guys
That's
part.
right. That's right.
And
Holding
so
those accountable for their ill-conceived actions.
exactly. And as long as I can get a piece of it, we're all good. Anyway, now, so my sense is that, we go, I don't know what's going on. And I was bringing this case, and one of our IRS criminal supervisory agents who I was friends with told me, he said, Eric, here's what you do. You go ahead and file the case, right? Do the 211, get your little green card back certified. You can prove they got it. Then I want you to bring it to me. If it's in our area, I want you to bring it to me because I want to put my eyes on it. And he even said, I have no idea if they're going to ever send it to me or not. I don't want them making that decision. I want to make the decision. So give it to me. Now, and so what I've been doing is, because I have a very good relationship with our local CI folks, what I'll do is I actually will bring it to them, even if it's somewhere else. Because what they'll do is they'll say, you know what, they'll get back to me and say, Eric, we got this. We've sent it to so-and-so, who is the special agent in charge of the Dallas office, the LA office, whatever. They've got it now. If you want to reach out to them, go ahead and do it. Because again, I want to make sure it gets out into the hands of the people who can actually make something happen with it.
Right. Eric, I would point out that for the listeners at home, what you and I are talking about, there's a fundamental difference in whistleblowing with the IRS versus whistleblowing with any other type of claim of fraud against the government. So, for example, if someone comes to me and says, I think my employer is committing some sort of healthcare fraud, some billing fraud, or they're defrauding the government on invoices related to military contracts. These are all types of things that the ordinary citizen can bring a whistleblower claim for, and we refer to those in the legal world as a qui tam action, okay? But in those cases, you have an avenue to use your lawyer to go to court and go to a court of law and actually put your filing on the record. It might be under seal, okay, where the public won't know about it. And then the US government has an opportunity to decide, are we going to pursue this case because we think there's something here? And if the government decides they're going to take over, then they take the case over and you're still sitting out here. Your recovery amount may change whether or not, depending on whether the government intervenes or not, okay? But your case is in court and you actually have a say on the timeline and what's happening with the case. Because if the government chooses not to proceed, you may very well have an opportunity to proceed on your own in the shoes of the government, okay? That's not tax cases. With the IRS, you're talking about essentially an administrative type whistleblower program where you're putting all of your hopes and dreams of bringing justice against the bad actor and your recovery, you're putting it in the hands of the IRS administrative personnel who you don't know and can't talk to about the case. You're not in court,
right?
Okay? And that's a huge difference. And so when we say we don't know what's going on behind the curtain, it's literally you filling out your form and giving as much data as possible, but then not really having any control over if they decide not to move forward with the case. Well, that's it, right? You have very little recourse. And we'll talk about how you might have some recourse, but it's minimal. It's a different universe than other types of whistleblowers. I think that's super important for listeners at home to understand that not all whistleblowing actions are created equal when you're talking about fraud against the government.
Now, let me ask you something, because this is one of the things we wrestled with. I'll give you an example. So New York has a whistleblower program. There's no award. The only way to get an award is to go in a qui tam. Now, again, and if you're listening, what Mike pointed out is a qui tam action. We would file the case. It's under seal. The government then has a period of time where they can look at it and either say, we're going to take the case over. So in that case, I think we get, like in New York, I think it's like 15 or 10 or 15% is our set. If we take the case and ourselves, if the government declines, now it's no longer under seal. We have to be prepared to prosecute that case,
right,
and take it forward. In which case we get, I think it's 30 or 35% in New York, if you're the ones who actually prosecute the case. This is what we wrestled with. do we whistleblow to New York, knowing they're not going to give us an award? But if they go forward, does it force the IRS in, because now they're going to pursue the tax claim?
Right.
So I'm wondering, in Texas, have you had, because you guys don't have an income tax, but you do have sales tax and with,
Franchise tax, right?
yep,
So there, I look at it as any opportunity you have, whatever state you're in, every state's going to potentially have their own local jurisprudence or case law or statutes on this issue of whistleblowing. I look at it as you want to get that 211, you want to get your IRS whistleblower claim on file, right? Because you want to be first in line with as much data as possible.
right,
But why not, if there's an opportunity to get the state looking at it or a local jurisdiction looking at it? Because oftentimes what you'll see is that if the IRS is sitting on it behind the scenes, it's just not moving for whatever reason, maybe the state has an extra person they can put on the state component of it, right? So forget the income tax, let's take a sales tax issue where you might have a local business owner who has been underreporting gross receipts because he has been playing games with his sales tax, right?
right,
Well, usually when you're playing games with your sales tax, you've also, Jimmy, you've falsified the numbers on your gross receipts because you don't want to put the correct numbers on one return and have it conflict with the sales tax returns, right?
right,
So now all of a sudden you can have a situation where you could get the state zeroed in on the sales tax and they'll get aggressive on that stuff. And that's going to inevitably lead to a change in the gross receipts, which then you've got ammunition where the state has they have sharing arrangements with the federal government anyway on these issues. Okay. And then number two, you'll have potentially information that says, look at what the state did. If you can get your hands on the result of the state case, right? So you can maybe use the state findings to push the IRS further along, and or the state's findings will be turned over to the federal government anyway and will result in an assessment, right? And so I think there's a potential benefit there.
yeah. I mean, you know what my concern was? My concern was, is there an argument because, and we'll get to this, let's assume, before I get too far ahead of us, let's assume we submit the case, IRS is working on it, there is a recovery. There's no guarantee they're going to give us an award.
Right.
Well, first of all, was the information publicly available? Was it already in the public domain? What Lee will tell you is that they would reduce your judgment. I know of cases, not my cases, where they've tried to argue no award to the whistleblower because they already had the information somehow, even though they never acted on it. So my concern, and this is what I was wrestling with, if I go to the state, let's say you go to Texas and Texas grabs it, and now there's this big finding, IRS comes in afterward, they have their assessment. Does the IRS turn around and say, well, it was really Texas, not you?
Yeah, well, I think in that case, your argument, and now you're left to have to argue about whether or not you're entitled to the reward or not. And I would hope that our file would indicate, yes, but this was not Texas on its own. This was Texas because we were there first, right? And that my chronology and my file is going to show that I told you, the federal government, and I also told the state government, and the changes at the federal level are completely traced back to my whistleblowing activity. And one would hope that would be enough to get you back into the zone of being entitled to part of the reward. And that would be the hope, right? I don't think there's a per se black, line in the sand that says, no, if the state brings an action and collects on it, and that's why the federal government now has an assessment, that you're going to automatically lose out on your reward. But they very well could try to make that argument and try to essentially shortchange us.
Right.
So,
Right. And so, let's get back to it. So if you're listening to this, and like I said, I'll put Mike's info in the bio, and Mike and I were talking beforehand. I'll also post, we'll do a webinar on this for free. All right. So we're going to do a webinar on whistleblowing. I'll look for that in the link below, and we'll send an email out as well. But Mike, so let's talk about this. So someone's at home, they think they know something, right? I think I know something, or listen, maybe I do know something. Hell, I'm the bookkeeper. In fact, some of my best whistleblower cases have been brought by the accountant Let me tell you a quick story. So I get called in to do estate planning for a client, and the client's trying to sell his construction company, and the accountant kind of foot dragged, and it didn't get sold timely, and literally the purchase price dropped. And I'm telling the financial advisor, I'm like, he has a claim against his accountant. The accountant, instead of 5 million, the guy got like 4. Cost him $1 million. Financial advisor said, yeah, he's not going to sue the accountant. And I said, oh, I don't know, $1 million. He said, he's not going to sue the accountant. The accountant knows where all the bodies are buried. Been with him for 30 years. He said, so this is one of those, whatever much he's been getting away with all these years, this is the price he has to pay for it, because he's not going after the accountant. The biggest whistleblower cases that we've seen have been from the former spouse,
right?
The accountant. We have a big case here, Mike. When you come up here, next time you're up here, if you can find the time, you need to go shopping at a place called it's a supermarket called Stu Leonard's. It's a lot of fun. You walk in and they have hot donuts that they're making. You can get samples, and they have stuff for the kids, like all kinds of, like the train locomotive running around, and all kinds of little shows going on with figures and dolls and stuff. So it's a lot of fun for families, and they have their own bakery. They have their own dairy. For instance, you can buy bread that goes bad in 3 days because it's real bread. Right. So it really a great place to shop. Well, apparently Stu Leonard, the father, the son now owns it. So I assume it's all clean now, but dad and his accountant had arranged a system. So let's say there are 15 registers. The ledger would stop reporting from one of them every so often. So basically, like, I'm making that, I don't have the right numbers, but 1/15 of sales never got counted. State came in to do an audit. Everything's fine. State leaves. The next day, Stu fires his accountant. The accountant picks up the phone and calls the state of Connecticut and says, hey, let me tell you what you missed. They went back. He got criminally prosecuted, spent time in prison. The lesson being, there's an old saying in the mob, 3 can keep a secret so long as 2 of them are dead.
That's right.
I'm not suggesting you murder people, but if there are people in on the conspiracy, you may not want to fire them right after the state leaves. Anyway, so
people's always they always know. They know what's going on.
Yep. So the real issue is, if you are somebody who thinks you know something, how would you suggest, putting together this claim, knowing, by the way, there are 1,000 going in every month.
Right.
And I think the staff, I think they just hired up to 40 people is what Lee has told us when we, for the conference. So you're talking 30 something people who are reviewing this stuff. It's a lot of claims. What are your suggestions for folks?
But when people, first of all, that bookkeeper, let's assume that the bookkeeper is going to come to your law office and say, I've got this, feeling, or I've seen the records. I know what they're doing, right? They're underreporting sales, and here's how they do it. Okay. So let's assume the bookkeeper knows. Well, you might think, I'll just take the form 211, fill it out, and it looks, it's a form. We'll just answer the questions and keep it on the form. But the reality is that you want to go beyond what's on the form, right? Because if you just do what's on the form, that may not be enough to grab the IRS's attention. It also may potentially leave you exposed to, yes, you've disclosed what you know, but the IRS will then take the case and find out, well, there were 6 other things that really make this a big case, and you didn't tell us about those, and therefore somehow you don't get any credit for that portion of the recovery. And so you want to make sure that your disclosure form is going to read, it's going to be reader friendly, right? You want it to have the exhibits. So can the bookkeeper get any of the bank statements? And can we compare it to the actual vendor reports where we can show how much have we bought from our suppliers versus how much we're selling? How much can we get our hands on, right? The bank statements, the business records, the QuickBooks, are these things that we can get our hands on to include in our disclosure, right? And our whistleblowing form. And we would attach all of that and make it super reader friendly. So I'm talking about a memo on top that's going to say, see Exhibit A, see Exhibit C. Here's the
Right.
bank statement where you can see, look at the deposits that month. Look at what they reported to the state for gross revenue that month, right? Here it is, smoking guns, right? Can we do that? And you may not be able to get all the perfect records, but I always tell people that the first version of a story that you hear is going to be what that client thinks you want to hear, but they may know more, or they may not even realize it, but they may know a lot more once you start probing, right? I call it peeling back the layers of the onion, getting to the good part of the onion and getting the best data from that individual, and then organizing it in a way that is actually reads like a book, right? And supporting documents, because then it makes it that much harder for the IRS to just throw it in the trash. Not that that's what they would do, okay? And it also makes it harder for them to try to shortchange you later by saying, well, you told us about this, but really, these other 10 things, you didn't know anything about that. We found that out from other public sources. You're not going to get part of that credit, right? And so the other thing I want to know is, did the bookkeeper participate in this in some way? And is that going to somehow reduce my recovery? And there may be that we can't do anything about it, right? And you can still recover even if you have what I call unclean hands,
Right.
right? And that's very different for the IRS. Other types of whistleblower programs, you can't recover if you've been criminally convicted on the issue. But here with the IRS, if you have unclean hands, you can still recover, but it might be reduced. So I think the important thing is to try to start figuring out early on, how dirty are my hands? And it doesn't mean you won't blow the whistle, but maybe there's a way to soften the blow of how dirty you look versus how dirty the owner of the business is.
Well,
Right?
and it's funny because one of the cases I cite a lot is I got a call from a woman. They're getting divorced. Why? They have a restaurant in Manhattan. The husband had a girlfriend. So he's been cheating. They're getting divorced. They go to get divorced, and he presents the tax returns, which she knows are vastly underreported. And she called, she said, I want to whistleblow. He's been taking 100,000 cash out of the business every single year that's not been reported. Okay, first question, how do you know this? I was the bookkeeper. I said, so you signed joint returns? Yes. You knew the returns were false when you signed them. There's no, and if you're listening to this, you have to understand, and your client needs to understand, there's no get out of jail free if you happen to be the whistleblower, right? You might get a slightly reduced sentence, in criminal because you were the first one in the door. The first one in gets the best deal. But the fact is, I'm going to try to talk your client out of that, all right? Because when people are getting divorced, people lose their minds, right? I don't care if I get hurt. I just want to hurt them.
Right.
That is, I'm not into recommending clients effectively commit, harry-carry to try to get even with the other party.
Getting even is not a good reason to go into the whistleblower program, and especially when you got a situation where you have potentially joint returns where the tax consequences are going to potentially flow down to that individual as well. You need to look long and hard, and you just really brought up a great point that I think we need to hammer home, is that if your client has committed some type of criminal act in the process of this whole transaction that caused the underreporting that you're now blowing the whistle on, they might still be prosecuted, even though they're blowing the whistle. And there's a famous case involving that. Now, for this individual, it was probably worth it. It's an interesting question.
Well, listen, if you're going to bring in UBS,
right? Yeah, if you go look at the UBS whistleblower, go Google it if you have never followed those cases in the news. But Mr. Birkenfeld was the whistleblower in the UBS case. I believe his reward was around $104 million, but he was prosecuted related to his role in the UBS banking investigation. And I think he received 40 months in jail. So I think the interesting dinner conversation question is, so would you go to jail for 40 months for $100 million? Surprisingly, I've asked this question at dinner parties like crawfish boils in Louisiana, and most people say, heck yes.
Remember something. I'm hiring Mike, right? And Mike is going to get me to the prison camp at Otisville.
That's right.
Where the worst part of my day is and by the way, the food's good. It's just boring because they only give you the same four things is what I'm told by my clients that have gone.
But it's interesting how because I have actually asked this at dinner parties before, and then I'll change the fact pattern, right? I'll say, well, okay, 40 months, but what about 8 years, 10 years? It depends on whether the dinner guest has kids or not.
Yep.
Right? Some people say I'll go to jail for 10 years, but they don't have kids at home, right? But all of a sudden, but it's a real question though, because 4 years and 100 million, okay, but 4 years for $100,000 recovery?
No,
Probably not, right? So that's the reality of the IRS whistleblower program. If you've got dirty hands, to be careful about the pros and cons that you're weighing and understand what you're getting yourself into. So.
right. No, it's but to get so assuming the client does not have dirty hands, that they're truly innocent and they have this. When we've submitted these packages, here's what I'm going to tell you. And if you go back, if you're listening to this, go back and listen to the use of informants with Christina O'Connell. She was talking about the use of informants. It is always better if like Mike said, can you get the bank statements? Can you get us some of the records? But let's say you can't, right? You don't have access. You want to give as detailed information as possible. One of the cases we brought that, again, I received the letter that they have now referred it over to audit, to exam, which means they looked at what we submitted and felt there was enough. She didn't have the records, but what she said was very detailed. This is the business. These are the number of undocumented workers. This is how they're getting the cash. And she walked us through. So we sent in a very detailed saying, look, our client, our whistleblower is unable to lay her hands on the documents. However, this is what she wants you to know. And here's how the scam is working. And it was about 4 months. They referred it over to exam, which means whistleblower read it, probably said, there's enough here for an examiner now to latch onto. Right. And so I think the lesson is my neighbor must be cheating. He can't afford a Mercedes. That's in fact, actually, that's the running joke Lee uses that they get. No one's interested in that. That sounds like BS. You're fishing. They're not going to do it. And by the way, one thing, Mike, I think you'll agree. If you do bring a whistleblower, don't think that the bureaucrats at the IRS are charged up and they're going to put in overtime and investigate that. They're going to look at it on its face. Is there enough here for us to get a good lead on, or is there evidence, or does this a smack of you're fishing? And honestly, with 1,000 of them a month, with all the shorthanded, as much as we talk about how audit rates have fallen and how high earners aren't being, audited or pursued, that's what you're dealing with. So whistleblower has got to be looking at this saying, is this worth bugging our limited, putting our limited resources into? Right. So if you have a client and you're thinking about whistleblowing, if you bring them to me or you bring them to Mike, or even if you go straight to Christina, what she's going to start doing is saying, well, how do you know? Do you have proof of this? And they're going to want details because they don't have the hours to go chasing people, in an attempt to see, is there something here? Is there something worth, is there, maybe we should just take a look at this. They don't have the time.
No, they don't. And it really does go back to the importance that if you're going to go down the whistleblower path, to take it seriously, not just an opportunity to fill out a form and see what happens. You really, the level of detail that you add will increase the chances that they can do something with the case. They just simply don't have enough individuals to fully go investigate every little claim that comes before them. And so it's really, incumbent upon the lawyer working with the whistleblower to really vet the claims, really ask the hard questions. I always like the idea of a chronology, right? So how do we know? Well, I was the bookkeeper. Well, let's back up a second. How long have you been the bookkeeper? What year did you get hired? What were your job responsibilities specifically? What bank accounts? You may not have the documents because now you don't work there anymore. Okay. What banks do you recall them working at? Right. What branches of those banks. Bank of America, well, they have a lot of branches. Was it one particular branch? Do you remember a banker? Was there a name of the banker that you talk to regularly?
Do you
Right?
remember? Do you remember? Do you remember the time of day they generally went to the bank? Because in this case, they actually had they went and pulled the camera feed, so
Yeah.
they watched them because at the criminal trial. What the AUSA's brought out is every single day about 3:30 they're coming in with a bag of money, right? And that pattern that jurors are impacted by that.
Knowledge of the individual showing that you're depositing cash, and did that cash not get reported? Right. I mean, that's the kind of thing that, the time of day that these things are happening. We see it quite a bit here in Texas, where you've got cash being withdrawn to pay workers, right? That reeks of all sorts of suspicious activity. On one hand, it's not illegal to withdraw cash. It's not illegal to pay people in cash, but it is illegal if you're doing it to avoid reporting employment taxes and or potentially undocumented workers, right? And so those are issues that if you can start to really hone in on what was the source of the cash, when was the cash coming out, what banks, right? The more you give them that level of detail, you're just increasing your chances of the case being taken seriously, frankly. So, that's what we like to try to do, is to try to, increase that level of specificity, organize it in a way that the average Joe could open that up and say, boy, that is suspicious. And that does look like there's some missing tax dollars. The other thing I think it's super important to point out, because we're talking about taxes and IRS and bookkeepers, but a couple of years back, the IRS expanded, or Congress expanded, what was considered part of the proceeds that could be included in a reward for whistleblowing to the IRS. And so we're not just talking about taxes anymore with the IRS. The IRS has other penalties they can recover related to foreign bank accounts and informational returns, like Form 8300s. So if you work at a car dealership and they're not doing their Form 8300s properly or at all, if you were to whistleblow on that, there are potential penalties that can be fairly significant that the IRS can collect. And if the Treasury collects on those, that can be included in part of the proceeds when you're looking at the reward. The big one would be international reporting forms. There is a plethora. I speak routinely around the country on international reporting obligations, and there are a number of international reporting forms that have nothing to do with taxes. They have these forms just talk about, tell us about your bank account, tell us about what assets you have or foreign entities you have an ownership interest in. If those forms are not being filed at all or improperly, that can lead to significant fines and penalties, all of which also a whistleblower can get a reward on. So keep in mind, we're not just talking about collecting tax dollars. It's going to be the penalties on those tax dollars and fines that the service can collect on forms that you could have a boss that has no tax due at all, but he's got some unreported foreign accounts. And those foreign accounts, maybe there's no tax due on those either. But if he didn't report the foreign accounts, you might be able to collect on that whistleblowing action.
Yeah, well, so you're talking tax. Let's look at just income and payroll. Tax, civil fraud penalty of 75%, interest, even accuracy penalties, right? 20%. The failure to file the foreign forms, $10,000 per year per form or whatever. The 926 transferring money offshore, the penalty on that is 10% of the amount transferred. Right. We've seen penalties of 500,000-600,000 for clients that had transferred to entities that legitimately they set up and they never filed the 926. We're in a battle with the IRS over. So, the numbers here can get big, and especially if you have, if they go for civil fraud, you're looking at 6 years.
Right. And right? 75% penalty on top of whatever the tax is.
Right.
All of a sudden, your $1 million issue is turning into a $2 million issue with penalty and interest. And I would, you mentioned, these different types of taxes. One thing that we talk about a lot right now is the IRS regularly announces publicly where they're spending their time and efforts because they have limited resources. And so one of the areas that they are really hot to trot on is payroll tax violations, right?
Right.
And I would just tell all the listeners that I can't tell you how many cases I have where, you talk about the bookkeeper having knowledge. What about when 50 of your workers know that you're not paying employment taxes, because they know that maybe you're paying a couple of workers in cash and you assume that maybe they're not reporting it either, right? But some of those workers may want to report. They want to do their taxes correctly, and they don't like that you're not giving them a W-2.
If they're trying to get citizenship,
That's
right?
right.
If they're trying to get citizenship, they're going to have to report it. The other thing is we've also seen is the extortion, right? It used to be undocumented workers are being abused by these, the employers. What we're seeing now is this reverse. They go get lawyered up, and effectively they're extorting now the owner. We can go to the government. You owe me for overtime. You owe me benefits, right? Medical and 401k and all the other stuff you didn't give us. In which case I've had to get my clients quickly in on voluntary disclosure to take the tax issue off the table. But no, it's
and the other thing, we've seen this just recently. I've gotten a couple of new payroll tax investigations that go on for 10 years and more. And I think taxpayers, individuals who are, let's say, an employee, they're getting more savvy and sophisticated themselves. 15, 17 years ago, even shorter than that, you couldn't log into the IRS to check on your payment history, right? You would have a practitioner might go pull your transcripts. That's been around forever. But more recently, me as an individual taxpayer, I can log in and check on my payments to the IRS for the year, right? Now, an employee, they can find that information out pretty regularly. So if an employee's been getting a W-2, which I've seen recently, where they're getting a W-2, they think their employer has done certain withholdings, right, for the employee portion of the payroll tax, and they can go on and log in and see what's been paid for themselves, right? And so they can find out, wait a minute, I don't see any payments that were made on my behalf. Wait, I don't see it this year. Wait a minute, I don't see it last year either, right? So these employees who maybe once would never have even been checking what their withholdings were beyond the W-2 they're getting or their pay stubs they're getting every month, now they can see on the service's website how much tax is being collected for them, right? Anyway, I think it opens up, because we've actually seen that where people that's how they figured out their employer wasn't doing right by them. They were actually getting a W-2, but there were no payroll taxes being filed by the company.
Right. So as specific as you can be, as much evidence as you can be, right? The 211 goes in. If you're listening to this and you're interested in, like you said, Eric, I agree with you, and Mike, I want to get it in the hands of CI. I don't know anyone at CI. Again, if you listen to when Christina was on with the informants, what she said is, look, if you listening to this and you think you know something and you don't know who to go to, you can still go to Christina. She will put you in touch with the right people. And I think that goes with anyone. You could call your local CI office, get someone and say, hey, here's my situation. If you're concerned, though, and you want to make sure what you're telling them and whatever, give Mike a call, give me a call. We will put you, what I'll do is I'll email the chief of criminal, right? James Lee. Trust me, he and his folks will be more than happy to talk to you. All right. They will have somebody either locally reach out to you if the client wants to meet face to face, and this environment might be tough. They will have an agent come talk to them. Whatever they're most comfortable with. Trust me, IRS CI is going to do everything it can to make your client, the potential whistleblower, as comfortable as possible and have them come in, right? They want that case.
That's exactly right. And just to be clear for the audience, what Eric and I are talking about is getting your Form 211 in first, because you want that in first, because that's still, you have to do that to get the whistleblower reward if it's going to go anywhere, right? But then to maybe shortly thereafter, possibly think about whether it's wise to get CI looking at it separately, after you know your claim, you have proof your claim's already been sent in, right? And I think if you go to the CI has its own portion of the IRS website. If you really don't know anyone, you don't know a lawyer, you don't want to contact a lawyer, you can there's ways to contact CI with, you just get on Google, and it's going to be, there'll be some ways that you can get your package into CI. But the best way to do it is with a professional who knows they can get it on someone's desk, a real live person, right? So,
well, and the one advantage I would say, and I don't want to, I'm trying to think how to say this. The one reason I would recommend coming to one of us is the fact that I want to make sure what you're saying isn't setting up your whistleblower. Like, for instance, I would want to poke and prod and the possibility of being able to help shape what you're going to submit, having been through this and been on both the defense side as well as brought the claims. I think there is something good about having a set of eyes like yours, Mike, mine, Lisa, my partner, somebody who's going to look at it and say, I see where you're going with this. What about this? Do you have any information on that or this? They're going to be interested in this. And this sounds vague. Were you involved in this? What is your culpability? And just, vet it before, because one thing I will tell you, and Peter Hardy actually told me this when I was talking about bringing the whistleblower. And he was very concerned. He said, you have a family member. What is their culpability? I said, none. He said, no, Eric, he said, because having been when he was in AUSA with the government, he said, here's the thing. Once you let the genie out of the bottle, you cannot put it back. Once this goes to the government and it's on the table, it takes on a life of its own. And it's very possible, like the guy with UBS, it's gonna have a bounce back. It's gonna reflect back on the whistleblower.
That's right. So you brought up some really good points. The importance of bringing in a professional like one of us to help with the whistleblowing process, it's kind of twofold, right? Let's simplify it. Number one, we can try to find out and really poke and prod to see, does the whistleblower or someone that's important to them have any exposure themselves, because we do a lot of criminal defense work on tax issues. And so we can tell, look, here is your weak spot. Okay, that's one reason. Then the other reason is the professional can also set the stage to potentially increase the scope of a potential reward. Because almost every meeting I have with a taxpayer, even not in the whistleblower context, they come to me with one problem, and through our questioning and knowledge, we're able to say, well, wait a minute, you've told me about this individual income tax issue, but let's walk back a step. What type of company is it? Was it a flow-through entity or was it a C Corp? Tell me about the C Corp's return. How did they book it on their records? Well, now I have a C Corp issue, right? So I've got an individual income tax issue, and now I have a C Corp issue, right? What about the employment taxes? Tell me about the number of workers. Well, that individual you're talking to may not know fully about a payroll tax problem, but through your questions, you might start to be able to assume, no, this sounds like they did this because they were trying to also cover up their payroll tax issues, right? So we're going to stick that on the whistleblower complaint also, right? And so that's the type of issue where when you hire a professional, they might be able to take what you think is your whistleblower claim and really turn it into a one-page whistleblower form and turn it into a 10-page issue of multiple issues. And that has the potential to really preserve your potential reward and increase it. So
yeah, and when
to the professional.
Yeah, and when they go to do the award, a lot of it is going to focus on it can range from, if it's, I think it's under 2 million, it's a 10% award. More than $2 million, it ranges from 15 to 30. That, where you fall in that range is going to depend on the amount of help that you gave. And so the more specific, and again, like Mike, you were saying, the more issues that you can point out. There are some times where I've added stuff in. So for instance, we know it's a sales tax case, but like you said, Mike, we believe that is to underreport their income, both federal and state. And we believe they're taking the cash and they have workers that are under the table. So they're evading employment tax and state withholding tax. I lay all that in. Now, I don't have evidence of that, but it does flow from, if they have a Zapper program on the POS system, so they're pulling cash out, they're doing something with the cash.
Right.
And my employee says, they have a lot of immigrant workers. They don't really speak English. Now, again, that doesn't mean they're not US citizens, but they're doing something with the cash. We know we have people that do at least fit, I hate to say this, the profile of, could be undocumented. I tend to be a little overzealous in what I put in the sense that I don't want them later to say, you didn't mention.
Right. Yeah. There's as long as you have a good faith belief as to what you're putting in there, there's little downside to adding more, right? Adding more detail. And one thing that comes to mind when utilizing a professional and adding more detail is that, there's a recent case out there, Apruzisi versus Commissioner. I'm sure I butchered that name, by the way. But that's a case from the end of 2019, essentially saying that the IRS has the final authority over the amount of the tax due. Well, keep in mind, your award may be completely based on the tax that's due, then the interest is going to be based on that tax due, then the penalty is going to be based on that tax due. And if the more you can give in specificity to increase the amount of tax you think is out there, the better your chances are of that number being close to what you think it should be. If you only say, oh, here's the issue, go figure the tax out, IRS, you might be in a situation like Apruzisi here, where the IRS comes back and says, no, the tax is much lower than what the whistleblower was thinking, and here's how we came to our determination. And the court's going to say, that's completely up to the IRS. You have no way to challenge that whistleblower. So if you think the amount of tax due is a certain amount or a threshold or an area, do as much as you can to get it there in your original package. And maybe the IRS will look at, they might still not agree with you. The IRS might still go lower. But if you can put the adjustments in front of them, again, that increases your chances that the final tax adjustment will be what you think it should be. Because if the assessment is lower than what you think it should be, you really won't have any grounds to challenge it. That's what the case stands for.
Right. And there are a couple things. One is, why does it take so long? Well, think about it. I brought those whistleblower cases. Exam is now on the target. If the target is smart, he's hiring, given that he's in a state, he's going to hire friends of ours, Mike.
Right.
And those friends, they're going to go to work on this. They're going to realize he's got criminal exposure. They're going to start trying to come up with ways to argue why it isn't, right? This is what we do when we're on the defense side. And inevitably, they're going to end up in appeals. They're going to end up in a battle. It may end up going to criminal, which can take years. So finally, all of that grinds through. Now there's, let's say, a final assessment, penalty, and interest. Then they have to collect it.
Right.
So, if the client has no money to pay, you don't get anything because the government didn't get anything.
Right.
So basically, one, don't whistleblow on poor people. All right. And two, just that process. That's why you've got this, the average can be anywhere from, 5 to 10 years before you ever see a dime. And what if the client ends up in what if the target ends up in a 10-year payment plan or does an offer in compromise?
Right. That's right. It's a good point for the whistleblower to understand that, we can do certain things to try to get on the right tables and in front of the right eyes, to dot our I's, cross our T's, get all the details in. But the process is going to take this 5 to 7 years or 3 years, just because of the nature of audits. Most of the listeners may already know, but let's assume there is going to be an exam of whatever you blew the whistle on, or a criminal investigation. The typical criminal tax investigation can last between 18 months and 3 years. That's just a standard number that you see quite a bit. I have ones that have gone on much longer than that. And if you take a civil exam, let's say your whistleblower form yields a civil exam that's initiated. Well, you could have an exam that could take months up to a year. You could have, and this is even on simple issues, then after the exam, you might have appeals, right? The taxpayer himself or herself might end up going to tax court or even going to district court. All of this is happening before there's ever a collection of money, right? and you're not going to get your whistleblower reward until there's a collection. So that's, that's just built into the nature of, the normal due process that taxpayers have in the course of an audit or an investigation. So it is a long process, which is another reason, when you have a professional involved, they know how to keep tabs on it, because you're not going to get many updates from the service or the whistleblower office, right? I believe if you request a status update in writing, you'll get a brief, curt response at least. But these are things that if you just try to do it by yourself, 3 years goes by, you may forget and lose your documents, right? And you might want to challenge whatever the IRS does, and all of a sudden your documents aren't even in the right order anymore. And so your professional, your lawyer, can really make sure that every year you're checking in and you're doing certified return receipt requested, right? And you're doing memos to the file of who you're talking to, and keeping tabs on the case, because once it's out of your hands as the whistleblower, it's pretty much out of your hands, unless maybe CI comes to want to interview you as a witness, or worse, you're more than a witness in their case. You're not going to have a lot of input into that process behind the scenes, if any.
Right.
So,
Well, and here's the other thing. I mean, and I know the government listens to this podcast, but one of the advantages I find of bringing it to our local folks, Mike, is I can give them a call and say, hey, what's going on? And what I've gotten from them is, look, they're not going to, again, they follow the rules. They can't give me the details. But what I have found is they can get back to me quickly and say, hey, I spoke to the civil guys, because, I have one where criminal said, look, it's just a little too old for us to make a criminal case, but it's a great civil case. Last week called and said, look, I ran into the civil folks, and they said they're actively working it, Eric. Great. Thanks. Thanks very much. Chris. Hung up. And I can tell my client, hey, look, I got the word. All they can tell me is, and this is from insiders, not the whistleblower office, that they're aggressively working the case. I think I can get an answer quickly. I think I can get an answer more quickly from my insiders. Now, there are cases where it's now off in another state and I don't have insiders. You can, Micah, you said, we send a letter, you get that page saying, hey, it's still active, blah, blah, blah. So at least they haven't closed their file on it.
Right. And look, we recognize that, there's statutory prohibitions from the IRS being able to share taxpayer-related information that's specific to their taxpayer file with us, the whistleblower. But the IRS, if a criminal investigation is going on, they're entitled to interview witnesses and check in with the lawyers for witnesses, just about the status of, hey, there's a case, the case is ongoing still. You already know that's ongoing because the CI's got to conduct its interview. So while on one hand, the IRS wants to say, oh, well, we can't tell anybody information about a tax file. That's true. That's correct. And they won't do it because there's the statutory prohibition on the specifics of a taxpayer's file. But there are certain things that are just general as to whether the investigation is still going on or not, that they may have to tell you anyway because you're one of the witnesses, right? They want to talk to you, right? So there are things you can find out that are not protected by the statutory prohibitions on disclosure. So that's where having your lawyers who have the contacts really comes in handy. So you can get that, hopefully get some kind of little update as to where it stands. But,
right. And that's, Mike, given the time is running short, let's say that you do bring a case, 7 years go by, you get the letter, congratulations, we're giving you an award, and you don't like the number. They say, Mike, your client, they thanks for bringing it to us. We're going to give them 15%.
right.
And the client says, wait a minute. I have the records. I had the bank statements. I gave them the names of the witnesses. Why am I not getting 30%?
Right.
What is the recourse for this?
Well, we do have recourse. It's a bit of an uphill battle, but the tax court has jurisdiction over challenges on whistleblower awards. That's going to be under Rule 13B. And when you petition the court, you're going to check notice of determination under 7623 whistleblower action, right? So there is a formal process to get in front of the tax court to look at these challenges to whistleblower awards. Unfortunately, a lot of the cases out there are oftentimes, whistleblowers wanting to challenge the fact that they didn't get an award or that it wasn't followed up properly. And so the cases out there are generally cases that are saying, look, there's just, the commissioner said there wasn't enough to proceed on this case. You can go look at Klein versus Commissioner as an example of that, where there's a couple of two different claims that were filed, challenging the commissioner's determination, and where the court's saying, no, the whistleblower office did not abuse its discretion when it's denying the whistleblower's claim and rejecting the whistleblower's claim. So you see a lot of that in the jurisprudence, where basically whistleblowers upset that they got nothing or it wasn't followed up on. And the tax court is generally not finding in the favor of whistleblowers too often, but there is the recourse, right? That is your recourse. We've already mentioned some other cases out there where they're saying the IRS has the final authority over the tax due. So that's where, hey, you're upset about the amount of tax that they've assessed, which impacted your award. And court there is saying, nope, IRS has final authority over that. So, but that's what you do. You go to tax court and you then have to spend time and money fighting on what the proper amount of the award is and what the whistleblower's office did when they were looking at this case and determining your award. And so that's your normal course, but be prepared for an uphill battle. I don't know. I'm not too familiar with very many successful tax court proceedings against the whistleblower office.
Well, I agree. I think, though, a lot of the cases that are brought, I hate to say this, are stupid cases. The
Right.
government never pursued it, right? Why didn't I get paid? The government never recovered anything. Some people bring cases that they feel that they should just get something for being a good person, and don't seem to understand the process. And then there are some where it really, the court is giving the IRS wide discretion. And so, Mike, listen, thanks for doing this. We're basically out of time, but everyone, Mike, as Mike and I discussed earlier, we're going to actually do a webinar on this. So, and I'm thinking, Mike, it'll be cool if we can give them the sample letters. Like we have screenshots of them in what we're doing for New England Rep. If you're not going to be on New England Rep or just want to do get them more involved on this, Mike and I are going to do a webinar on this. We'll be sending. I'll put the details in the description below. We'll also send out an email as well, and that way also you can do Q&A. All right, we can do some Q&A with people, which we really unfortunately can't do in the podcast. So, Mike, listen, thanks for doing this. It's terrific. And
tax geeks like us, I guess.
Yeah, well, listen, it's I find tax controversy to be utterly even 23 years later, it's still utterly fascinating to me. There's always something new. There's quirky. You find out a lot about people.
That's right.
It's always enjoyable. And I happen to enjoy these cases for a variety of reasons. The potential payoff, there is a justice aspect because some of the people we've whistleblown are truly scumbags. It just, the one frustrating thing is for clients. Years go on, and I have one, the client has passed away.
Wow.
But the estate still has the claim, and they actually were so nervous about it. It's in the will. I'm a special executor, authorized to pursue their whistleblower claim and any other claims, against the government. So that was a client that was very motivated. Right. To change their will. I remember the executive called and said, "You're a special executor." I'm like, huh? And they're like, "Oh yeah, this whistleblower claim, she was adamant that no one that her kids not get the right to get their right to kill it." So because they're very tight with the target. Anyway, yeah, it's crazy, but listen,
never know. That's for sure, man.
All right, listen, thanks. And if anyone wants to get a hold of Mike Villa, I will put Mike's info down below, so you can shoot him an email, bring your claims to Mike if you don't want to bring them to me. And thanks for listening, everyone. Mike, thanks for doing this. And we'll I'll talk to you next week. But meanwhile, we're gonna we'll do that webinar and we'll get that information out to you.
Sounds great. Thanks, Art.